morning, Nick. How you doing?
Record, my brother. I'm doing well.
That's good. You always say that. Have you ever said anything else?
I'm always doing well. You got to realize I live a charmed existence.
You
One
do.
time I heard you walk and the path emerges beneath your feet. That's my life. Everything just, it works out more or less well. And I'm just too lucky. Knock on something. Yeah.
Knock on wood. Knock
It's
on wood.
always going well.
So this one today we got a guest today, and this guest is actually, I think it might be the first guest that we actually ever invited in, when we started this podcast in February or something, 2021. But it took us 2 years to find a date to talk about this. We got Wietske van Osch here today with us. Hey Wietske, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here after 2 years.
Well, exactly. I mean, like in the meantime, we had a pandemic. You went to Greece, I think. Spent some time in Greece, and then there was a whole bunch of other things that got us to delay this and delay this and delay this. And the reason why initially, remember 2021, why we did bring you on. Remember, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and on some level, this was the main reason we started this, right? Because we didn't see each other, and we felt like we wanted to have a little bit of the normal conference bar talk that we would normally have in a digital format. Anyway, so I remember at that time, you were actually doing research, what the pandemic was doing to IS researchers, to us as a community. And I remember that was the reason we asked you back then. But of course, it's 2023 outside, the sun is shining. We have new crisis now, but the pandemic is long forgotten, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so maybe just a little bit of a background. Indeed, at the start of the pandemic, I had just moved institutions, and I know both of you had as well. So I just moved to Montreal with my husband, who's also an academic, right? And my son at the time was 10 months old. And moving to Montreal, which is a multi-million city, the wait list for daycares was 3 years, right? So the first few months was disruptive enough, trying to take care of a 10-month-old, looking for a nanny in a city where I didn't know anybody, didn't have a network. And so by the time I found a nanny, which was end of February 2020, the lockdown was announced 2 weeks later, right? So the nanny and for the next year, I was on my own with my son, who was then 15-month-old, got pregnant as well, shortly after
wow.
a child.
So a 15-month-old and a baby. And we know men are useless, right? And in the pandemic, women pretty much were overburdened. And men, we lived a good life. I felt like, I don't know, because women still had to maintain their work and take care of the kids and do everything else, right?
Exactly. And that maintaining work really was trying to focus on those activities that had to happen, right? Teaching, supervising students. So my research was non-existent at the time. My productivity totally plummeted. And that was sort of what inspired this work, right? I was talking to other friends in academia, young mothers with kids as well, most of them untenured at the time. And so I felt like something had to be done, right? There had to be awareness. And in news articles, there was a lot of emphasis on women are not publishing anymore. They cannot write papers.
Yeah, I remember that. Yep.
But men are submitting more. So with that, I actually reached out to Kathy, who I know was a guest on your show as well, Kathy Urquhart, and she said, okay, these claims in news articles are nice, but they're not based in research, right? Could we actually do some real research on this and see, is this happening in the IS field as well, or is this unique to the bench sciences? And she connected me with Dr. Boo.
Dr. Boo. So for people that don't know Dr. Boo, this is Cynthia Beath. I don't actually know why she's called Dr. Boo. It kind of fits, though.
No, but I'm not sure I'm allowed to tell.
I thought it was just Boo. We call her Dr. Boo?
Boo, Dr. Boo. I think you can do both. So yeah, she became a great friend after, and we decided to really embark on that journey together, right? Which really started at the time that the COVID-19 forum was created for the AIS. So we decided that was a great opportunity. We posted the question there, right? Are editors-in-chiefs of our journal, our IS journals, seeing a drop in submissions by women and an increase in submissions by men? And not all EICs responded, obviously, but some of them responded. Robert Davison from ISJ, Chris Sauer from JIT, they did some analysis and they actually didn't find an effect, right? These submissions were Now, one side note to make there is that the women to male ratio for the AIS is 1:2, right? So one third of our members are about women, but their editorial boards are actually about 50% women. So that could be a factor that just generally makes their journal more attractive to submissions by women. That's just a side note. We don't know.
Is that true, though? I mean, is that true that there is a gender bias and you pick a male or a female editor? Like, that's news to me. I'd never heard that.
I don't know. I have no idea, but it could be a factor, right? Or it could be that people felt more comfortable disclosing their challenges as they were working on their submissions.
Or wait, I have a theory, though.
Okay.
I think we're naturally like tech, right? I grew up in tech. Out of college, I was in tech companies my whole life and everything like that. And it's very much a male-dominated kind of world, right? And half of it is like frat boy culture. The other half is male nerd culture, right? And I think women self-select into this field based on being badasses. So what we do is it's 1-2, but the women that choose this route are kind of bigger badasses than women who choose other routes. So our women are just better than other women. Wait, here's the problem, Wietske. This is the problem when you start having me talk about gender. I have no business. So I can't win either way. I have no business, first of all, talking about gender because, I'm like male. Not only that, I'm over 50 now. So when you're an over 50 man in the US, you have 50-year-old man privilege, which is like the greatest of all privileges because you can walk through any barrier and the police will just let you go because you're like a 50-year-old man. And especially if you're dressed well, everybody just assumes you're a serious person and that you belong, whatever it is you're doing. And they just defer to you. Police pull you over, call you sir, and let you go. So I live this easy life. And then for me to talk about women's issues, the only thing I can do is screw up. Right. If I try to be really progressive and, I'll probably do it wrong. And then if I try to be old school or if I'm just so men probably just shouldn't even talk about these things. Right.
I think it's actually a conversation we should all have, and I come back to that in a little bit because I think there are some important takeaways. But just on the flip side, very quickly, there was also some evidence that there was an effect, right? Jan, you were EIC at the time of communications.
Yeah, I remember sending you a data set as well. Yeah, I remember
exactly,
that.
Exactly. You actually did the analysis for us, even better. So
I did.
and you actually showed that there was an overall increase in submissions during that first spring of the pandemic, but submissions for women had gone down a lot, and for men it had gone up. We also worked with Dorothy Leitner for a journal of the AIS, and there, in a nutshell, what we found is that overall the lockdown had a negative impact on submissions. So submissions were down across the board, but it was down much more for women. So 32% more of a decrease for women than for men. Now, one thing that we noted when we were doing this was that, journal publications, right? When we submit a paper to a journal, sometimes these are projects that are 6 to 8 years in the making. That the pandemic just came about 2 months ago, had that really affected this last mile of a very long journey, right? So the other thing we did is that we reached out to the program chairs from the International Conference on Information Systems to compare the data from 2019 and 2020. And what we found there was that submissions for first author by gender were nearly the same. So there was only like a 1% drop for women, but overall there was a 17% drop for women across all authors. But again, even the Conference on Information Systems, right? Like we tend to be pretty well prepared when we submit a paper because we know the acceptance rate is not that high, unless it's like what you spoke of in a recent episode. Sometimes we throw a paper together in 2 or 3 days, but I think overall these tend to be papers that are long in the making. So it might be really, really hard.
So the long and short of it, the long and short of it is this, that it did appear to disproportionately affect women, but probably not as much as people make it out to be, right?
Actually, I think it's something else. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jan.
If I look back at my own experiences, I think the pandemic had different phases. In the beginning, it felt like a sabbatical. Oh, I'm sitting at home, I'm writing a few papers. I don't have to do much teaching. I don't have a lot of meetings anymore. So cool, And then after a while, I got severely bored, and then at some stage I got a little bit depressed.
All
and
right,
then I
so
got,
listen, you said bored, and You said bored and you said depressed, and here's the deal, Wrecker. This whole COVID thing, isn't it boring at this point? Aren't we all depressed just even talking about it? Should we really be discussing COVID? Like we're COVID burned out. I actually say this. What do you guys think? Can you submit? I almost have a negative bias against COVID papers. If there's a COVID paper right now and everybody has their COVID paper and it gets submitted to me, or if it just pops up and it says something about effect of the pandemic on XYZ, I don't want to read it actually. So I don't want to publish it. I don't want to read it. I'm not positively predisposed to it. I feel like we're all just COVID burned out and everybody did their COVID paper and no one's going to read these things. Do we even care about COVID anymore?
It's a good point. So I think the takeaways should be really beyond COVID. But I think one point, and I think, Jan, you touched on that is important, that even if the immediate effect might not have been as strong as we expected or was mixed, I think we have a much more serious problem in the next few years. Because imagine that you weren't even able to get around to doing the finishing touches on a project in the making for 6 to 7 years. Being home with little kids for 2 to 3 years with lockdowns, closed daycares, no ability to find nannies, it was impossible to start new projects. It was impossible to apply for grant funding or to obtain any other kind of resources that allow us to launch new projects, right? So I really think that what we saw during the pandemic, or at the start of the pandemic, was just the tip of the iceberg. And I think the effects are going to be much more long lasting. I think this is the nature of academia, right? It's a slow process. Research publishing is a slow process, takes many, many years. So any effect we saw at the start will just become bigger. Over time.
I think that's a very good point. I mean, I'm trying to map that to the type of research that we were doing at the time, or that I'm still doing, which is field research with organizations. You know what? When the pandemic hit, we had to stop that. Right, for two reasons. Number one, we couldn't go there, right? Yeah. And secondly, of course, anything we would do would then be colored by whatever, the regulations and impact was on these organizations. So some of the data collection, we literally stopped then, and then now we're writing papers. We basically said, well, we collected this data until February 2020 because, well, the pandemic hit, and then you kind of hope that was a natural ending point, because if not, all your research was gone to waste. And then you had to wait, because everything you would do then would be colored by the pandemic, So what I'm saying is, I think you're right in the sense, I think we'll see a lot less field research in the next couple of years, because it was really difficult to do, even more so than normal.
Yeah.
You know what it did? It did Zoom, right? It made Zoom mainstream. Like you're just talking about field research right now. Any qualitative projects I'm on at the moment, in the old days, you would go talk to someone. You would be on site. My dissertation, I was in NASA, in the building, and I couldn't even conceive of not doing a field study and not being there, right? Now, I'm part of multiple field studies where every single interview is through Zoom.
But I don't think this is just not the same. Like to me, what you're doing is a bunch of interview studies. You're not doing field research. I think there's a really qualitative big difference if you go into an organization and see what NASA is like, or if you talk to a guy that has NASA in their email. That's two different things.
But go look at Google right now. They're not even there, right? You can't go to their organization because they don't go to their organization, right?
Yeah, that is a good
studying point. Google, the only way to do it is through Zoom interviews, right? So the pandemic did have legit outcomes. And I wonder if maybe studying those outcomes, right? Like virtual work, right? That's Wietske, right? Wietske, right? That is one of the, so by the way, Wietske's name, we talked about this before. It means Wietz is joke in Hungarian. And then Wietske would, I guess, be like little joke. And you're not a little joke. You write really cool papers. Preparing today, and this is a total but you have this fishbowl paper, Living in a Fishbowl or Not. You looked at Enterprise Social Media last year. And this is just a little tangent. I want to recommend this paper to anyone. Beautiful. This paper is set up like old school. It's like a really nice way to set it up. It's like, here's one explanation. It's about enterprise social media and creativity. And do people, is your work transparent or not? But you said, here's one theory that says it's this way. Here's another opposing theory that says it's another way. You do your field research, you find that they're both right. And it's a beautiful paper, actually. I wish you would have sent this to me. It's at JAIS, wonderful journal, but
it went through 3 rounds at MISQ and at ISR. So.
Wow, really? Well, you know what?
Why did it get rejected?
You know what, Wietske? Good for JAS. You know what? My takeaway there is good for JAS. I think I said this a few times. I think the top journals that suffer from type 2 errors, they rejecting papers they should have published, and it's good for JAS that they published your paper, which, because I've read it. Actually, I happen to read it too. It is really cool, right?
Yeah.
And so I think
why was it rejected?
I think at the time, because honestly, this paper started before the pandemic, and this was one of these pandemic experience, right? One of my revision rounds at JIS took over a year because of the pandemic. I was home with the kids. I was no time to do the revisions. And actually, we got really lucky with the SC at JIS, Rajiv Sabharwal. He was very understanding. My co-author also is untenured, 2 young kids. We both lost very close family members during the pandemic. So it was a really, really rough ride. And he was very understanding. When one time we needed more than a year to do the revisions, he worked really hard to get us the same set of reviewers because they actually believed in the paper. But the reviewers we got at the other journals, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but they did not believe in the paper. Let's keep it at that. And
here's the problem. This is my issue. Any editor that ever listens to this is by now, my problem with the editors in our field is that they don't edit, right? Reviewers, by their nature, especially at a top journal, are going to be risk averse and try and poke holes in your paper. So they will find flaws. They're looking for flaws. They will find them. And I'm sure if I went and looked at your paper with a critical eye, I would see a couple issues in the paper as we can. But if we think of each paper as just a brick in the edifice of our knowledge, right? It's one foray, and it's a nice, rigorous one. And I'll tell you this right now, your paper is. And that's the editor's job. The editor's job is to have the bigger perspective, not just be risk averse, but say, yeah, it's flawed. Make sure you put that in the limitations. Let's publish this thing. And the fact that editors at ISR, and I don't know who your editors were, you don't have to tell me, but the fact that I would argue, unless I'm missing something big, they didn't do their jobs with this paper. This shouldn't have been rejected. And that's awful.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, I think good for JIS. Seriously, of course, good for Wietske. It's good that this idea is out there. Hey, I know that Nick doesn't want to talk about this, but I do. Like, so
what,
like,
you're going to bring up COVID again? I was changing.
I want to bring up. I know you're changing the topic, but can we spend 5 more minutes on this? Because I'm really curious. It's like what I do think there's stuff to be learned, and I don't want to talk about the pandemic per se, but I do think that it changed a few things. You mentioned the field research and the Zoom interviews and whatever. You mentioned there's changes in topics like virtual organizations and remote work, that kind of stuff. I personally felt that there was a shift in the community itself. Yeah. How we get together, how we function as people. Because frankly speaking, before that, we would see each other 3-4 times a year. We would all go to the summer conference. We would go to the winter conference. We would go to one other one, whatever. And we would see each other all the time, talk to one another, whatever. And then we didn't talk to one another in 3 years. And I don't think that did a lot of good by and large. So I do think there are some implications, and maybe we can spend 5 minutes on talking about them. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so actually for the implications, I want to emphasize that I think the implication goes beyond even just the topics we research, the methods we use. But I think the main message that we're really trying to deliver with the paper, and maybe we can even deliver it now better that the pandemic is over, is how do we respond to if there's even slight changes in productivity as a result of this, which might have lasting effects? How do we respond to that? What are broader takeaways? And I think I can pose this question in a much better way. So let's put it differently. Nick, do you know the age of Jan's children?
Yeah, they're little dudes, somewhere in the range of 3 to 10.
Is that correct, Jan?
3 of them.
Well, it's 2 and 8, between 2 and 8. So we had a COVID baby as well, right? So in 2020, my wife got pregnant again.
Yeah. So
wait, 2.5 now. Yeah, 2.5, 5, and 8. Yeah.
So not bad, Nick. So I have to compliment you both, actually, right? Jan on being open, in sharing about your family situation, Nick, for showing that you care. But I really think that this is the exception, right? Many of us don't talk much about our home life, or not even with our close collaborators or with people in our department, people that are close to it, right? And I think this is very different from maybe what we see outside academia to some extent. If you walk into an office building, right? If you go into companies, many people have picture frames on their desk. And actually, I see some behind you, Nick, of their family, of their children. But when you walk into offices of most academics, what do we have on our wall? We have diplomas, we have awards, but there are no personal.
And we have conference proceedings from 1987.
Wietske, I have to say that's one of my big problems with academia is that I don't think people know how to. Where there's too many introverts. These introverts want, and you get obsessed. I see it with myself. I won't be present in a conversation because I'm thinking about the paper I'm writing, right? And I'm probably more interpersonal than most academics. So think of like that side of me without the person who really likes to go out and have drinks and socialize and do whatever. And that's what we are. We have a bunch of, I guess, just not particularly outgoing folks, maybe introverted. And then they don't build a culture. They don't build the relationships with each other that they could and all that. You're absolutely right. That is interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's the main plea here that we're trying to make. We need to normalize discussions about home life, right? In many universities, many IS departments, people are discouraged to talk about their home life. And we're really treated as sort of 100% researchers. That's who we are, right? That's what we do. But not people with the whole gamut of other responsibilities. We might have young children. We might have a sick parent. We might have a sick partner. We might care for elderly parents. And so I think what we try to do at the end of the paper in Communications of the AIS, and that was focused on the pandemic, but I really think it goes beyond that, is that we need to normalize these discussions about home life and about personal challenges. And that has implications for many of us. And I think touching on your episode,
see, you're clearly not American though, right? Because we in America, the idea is just shut up and do it. Do your work, right? Yeah. If you've got issues, if you've got challenges at home, okay, we all do. Now shut up about it and do your work. You know,
so what people don't see is about
for me.
I'm shaking my head vigorously here, which you obviously can't hear. But I will say this: so I think if you think about the profession of an academic and the sort of the idea behind that profession is, you give the idea of tenure is that you give people a lot of security and safety and I don't know that worldly matters are being taken care of, so that you give them the freedom to roam around and follow their ideas and do whatever they think is a good thing to do because it solves some problem, right? That's what we do in advancing humankind, and with that comes this enormous flexibility. Yeah, we have to teach like 2 hours on a Wednesday or whatever, but most of the other time we can do whatever the hell we want. To me, this always implied that you got to live that. You really got to own this privilege of flexibility, because otherwise you could just go to any organization, put in 8 hours a week, make more money maybe, or at least the same money, whatever. But the key thing is always that you got to be flexible. So that means like, I'm sorry, I can't take this call because I got to pick up my boy from school. And I learned that very early because one of my advisors, Peter Green at the University of Queensland, an old school gentleman, chartered accountant type of professor, right? Accounting IS professor. Anyway, so he was like, I need to work on this revision of my paper. Peter, let's have a meeting. He says, I'm sorry, mate, I'm taking my boy surfing. That's it. I was like, oh, okay, well, is that what we're doing? Okay. And then I thought like, wow, that's kind of cool. He says, I'm sorry, I need to go with my boys surfing because they're 16 and they'll leave me soon. And I want to go surfing with them. And you stupid little paper. I don't care. We can deal with that tomorrow. And I always felt that was such a healthy attitude towards it. And, and I wanted to also say this, Wietske, I'm kind of shocked by what you're saying is that in many IS departments, we're discouraged because this is limited experience, of course. But I felt during the pandemic, that whenever someone wrote an email saying like, I'm sorry, I'm underwater, I can't do this. Can we give you an extension for your resubmission or for your reviews or anything like that? I've never heard anything else but sure. How much time do you need? Like, everyone I felt very lenient. And
they still are, and they were before the pandemic, and they are after the pandemic. There's not.
Yeah, I mean, like, have you ever not granted an extension to an author if they asked for one? I've always done that. Sure, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Wietske, all right. Here's the question though for you. Why do you think that this matters? That we don't know each other and we don't know each other's kids, and why should that matter?
I think it's important that people can bring their whole self to work, right? That people understand your personal circumstances, especially when challenges arise. And I think it's also a duty to some extent, right? Especially as we are mentors that are training the next generation of PhD students. I have PhD students come to me all the time with personal challenges that they cannot discuss with their advisors because they're afraid to disclose them to their advisors, and they come to me because they feel they can trust me. And I think we need to rewrite those norms, right? And I completely agree with what you said. I think the pandemic normalized these types of conversations much more than we ever had before. But I just hope that as we return to sort of life as normal, now that the pandemic has officially ended, we don't lose some of that, right? That sense of.
But at the same time, at the same time, academics are among the whiniest people. Okay. I find that so many academics have no experience whatsoever in the real world. They never had a real job, and they come and then they're like, oh, I'm so busy publishing papers. And I'm so busy, and this academia is so hard, and they're expecting me to do things, and I just want work-life balance, and I want this. It's like, you can have work-life balance. Just don't expect to be at a top-tier institution getting paid to be a research professor unless you're doing top-tier research. And if you're doing top-tier research, plan to work. You're getting paid well. And then there's this other myth that, Recker, you just said, that all these academics say, I could be making much more in industry and da-da-da. It's like,
I don't even believe that.
That might be true for some, and it is true for some. And I'll tell you this right now. It's probably not true for the vast majority of academics. I think the vast majority of academics would be generally useless in industry. And I think we have a very comfortable, very pleasant work environment. I coached soccer for my kids when they were little. I coached wrestling for my son. We have incredible flexibility. We should wake up every morning, thank God that we are academics, that we have this privilege to teach and to do research. And we have to kick a little ass if we're going to try and do it at a top tier place. But I think academics are whiners, and I have never seen, and maybe old school, it was there, but certainly in my experience for the last decade in academia, there isn't. Hey, there's your little dude right behind you. But there hasn't been. I haven't seen these. But then again, I'm not a. What's he doing?
He's also.
Hey, dude.
What
does he need?
He wants Diddy.
What does he want you for? Just hit him. Get him out of here. Say, wait, kids are here to be seen, not heard.
You're such a
American.
so 1980s American white dude.
Well, I still think that it's just important to have the transparency, right? And the transparency starts with ourselves, really. If we are not transparent about our own situations, we can't expect others to be. And I think like your episode in February, right, where you talked about junior people need to lead writing and revising manuscripts. I actually completely agree with you there, right? It's a golden experience, and they shouldn't just say, well, Nick, you know the theory, why don't you write the theory section? But I think that junior faculty are also the ones that most likely to experience disruptions even beyond the pandemic, right? They're often young, might be trying to get pregnant, might have young kids, might come with all kinds of challenges, right? In that period of their life. They're before tenure, lots of stress. And so just being able to be open with their co-authors, right? So that co-authors are aware of any challenges that people go to, so that we temporarily could shift our collaboration dynamics. I'm not saying, junior people should say, we're so busy, we have so much to do. You senior people, you have the comfort of tenure, you should write a paper. But during exceptional circumstances, it is necessary to have that openness, that transparency, to share that with your team. And that's as much the responsibility of the junior people, but also the senior people, for creating an environment where junior people are comfortable disclosing it. And I think that is my point, right? If PhD students come to me and tell me, I cannot talk about my personal life with my advisor, like these things have happened, I'm telling you.
Tell me about that. How do you not, how could you be an advisor and not, what are they just not empathetic at all to other humans, or
I think these people do exist. Yeah, I think these,
if they do exist. I think they exist more than you think, because
I think so too.
That
Nick,
come to me are very frequent, and And so I really think it's up to us to be the change, right? You are senior, I'm mid-career, but we do mentor students, right? If we create a climate where this communication is welcomed, we know that the next generation of researchers will be more open. And I agree with you, Nick. I think people do like to complain. I think that's actually universal, not just academics. I think people like to complain. So I'm not saying like little complaints, but I think many people have major personal struggles, not just during the pandemic, in
Absolutely.
everyday life. And they should be able to disclose those and to ask their co-authors, you know what, I know I said I was going to write this section, but I just cannot for this round of revision. I'll do my best to make up next round because I want this paper to succeed. I want to be an active co-author, but this round I just cannot do, or at least I cannot give you the quality that you expect. Or
and
something.
maybe, yeah, and maybe this may sound horrible, Nick, but I was actually thinking about this the other day. I think you may have been very lucky or very privileged, or just, I don't know, but maybe you just had the best advisors ever, always. But I certainly come out of an institution where that wasn't the case for the vast majority. It wasn't a top tier institution, which means that most of the people weren't all that good. And that means also the advisory capacity wasn't all that good. And I saw so many students really struggling with, sorry to say, horrible advisors. You can't put it any other way. They were methodologically horrible. They were, they were not well trained. They were, I don't know, they were just not good at their job. Sorry, it's just true. And you can say, well, get rid of these people, get better people, but that's also not the reality. So I think for a lot of people that are maybe not in the Ivy League top tier, whatever, they would have had these experiences. So for example, one of the experiences I've had is I saw so many advisors that were, I don't know, say they did case study research, but they always wanted to do experiments. So they got PhD students on that said, I want to do an experiment. And they would go to these advisors and said, great, do experiments so I can publish an experiment paper, even though I know shit about it. And that happened all the time. And it was horrible, of course, for the students because they couldn't get good help. So their experiments weren't all that good. And, and I was sitting there thinking, like, how can you advise someone on something that you don't even know yourself? Like, how's that supposed to work?
That's what I did with Tawfiq, right? He was my postdoc. And I'm like, yeah, I want to do experiments. So he taught me how to do experiments.
Well, he was already, at least he was already at least he was already a postdoc, and at least you knew that you were not good at it. Right. Anyway, so I do think this advisor-student relationship isn't all that brilliant all the time. And very often I found, very often, to be honest, it was the advisor's fault. It's a relational thing. So it's always, two sides to the story. But the advisor, it's a very difficult role, I think, for many to play. Yeah.
You're right. I bet you there are very few. I think there are very few really excellent advisors, right? Yeah. I think that's and those of us who are lucky to have them, that's great. But I think there's a lot of people that are successful that maybe didn't have the great advisors. They just figure it out. They figure something out. They figure out a niche, right? And those with the great advisors, there are a lot of them who don't do a lot, like from a research standpoint. So I think in the end, there's an interaction, and people like me who actually had great advisors and had everything line up nicely. It's easy for us to say, but at the same time, I did spend a lot of times staying up all night, working on stuff, doing data analysis, right? It's not like it was handed to me. So even those who have privilege, if they do well, they earned it, right? It's just those who without those privileges have to probably work harder to get there,
So I wanted to give one, maybe a positive example of what Wietske just mentioned with normalizing, creating transparency and so forth. So in our special interest group, DIE, Digital Innovation, Transformation and Entrepreneurship, we actually have two student ambassadors, Ollie and Anne-Katrine, and they just created what they call like an early career research and networking event. Yeah, so they bring just a place where you bring your drink and have a Zoom call, like what we did in the pandemic, and you talk about stuff. And what they actually talk about is not how do I get this paper published and how do I deal with a revision. They actually have what are the best practices and how to reconcile research, teaching, and work-life balance. This is literally what they talk about, to share with one another some tips and practices about how to do all of that and how to be transparent and how to deal with issues and so forth. And I think this is exactly what you mean, right? That we start having these conversations. And again, I wanted to say that I do think we've come a long way. Right. So if you think about the Women's Network, for example, that's been, I don't know, it's been existing for decades, hasn't it? I mean, and I see this at every conference now. There's obviously the doctoral student corner, and they do great things. And so I do think sometimes I think we're being very harsh on ourselves, because I wonder if all the other disciplines are actually as accommodating and as supportive as we are. I think we're doing decent. This is not to say we're doing great, but I think there are things we do that maybe others don't even do. Right? I think there's harsher fields in academia than IS, to be honest.
No, I think you're probably right. I think the main question is just, are there things we could do even more to support junior faculty, and especially the groups that are more disadvantaged, right? Because of personal challenges that we know will fall more on minorities than on women. So can we do more for them? And one idea that we propose in the paper, and I think Elsevier already started doing some of this, right? They started collecting gender data. Now, when people submit a paper, could we collect more data? Could we see, are these people pre or post tenure, so that we put more emphasis on the role of the SE or AE to make sure they make timely assignments with reviewers, to make sure that if reviewers don't submit within the 3-month time frame or whatever it is, the 4-week time frame that they have, that they follow up proactively, right? Part of it is the responsibility of the author. I mean, in the editorial we wrote for Journal of the AIS, we said that, right? As an author, you have to make sure when you submit the paper, you do your due diligence. You make sure you disclose all your conflicts of interest up front, so you don't waste time on the side of the editor in terms of figuring those conflicts of interest out. And you can also follow up. For me, this was a really uncomfortable experience with JIS, right? Every time that the time frame had passed for the reviewers, I followed up diligently with Rajiv, and sometimes I thought, okay, this person's going to think, what is this woman? She's always, the day that the decision was supposed to be made, I have an email from her in my inbox. But if you're junior, if you're dependent on a publication for tenure, you can follow up. But maybe on the side of the journal, we can think more proactive, right? Is there data we can collect? And of course, this can be voluntary in terms of gender, in terms of career stage, in terms of maybe even for the future caregiving responsibilities that are unusual.
Wietske, right? So this is a very, and I always, so there are two things that always annoy me, right? One is when young people want to focus on work-life balance. It's like, great, go ahead and focus on work-life balance. You will probably not, unless you're like way more brilliant than the rest of us, you are probably not going to achieve the highest levels of success in your field. And that's not just academia, that's literally any field. If your whole goal in your 20s and 30s is work-life balance, you're probably not going to achieve the top tier, right? That's fine. Then don't. Then you won't in your career. The thing that annoys me is when people want to be at the very top of their game and have work-life balance and have it all and be the world's greatest parent and be the world's greatest. You can't. You end up having to make, and you know, sometimes you have to do it for periods of time. You have to have a 4-year sprint where maybe you don't have as balanced a life because you're working very hard, and that pays off over time, you know, or something like that. But so that's the one thing that annoys me. And the other thing that annoys me is that we have to do extra stuff for people. We have to keep track. No, I think if we increase cycle times or decrease cycle times, then we take care of untenured people quickly, right? And it's not just the underprivileged untenured people, it's untenured people, right? If we had editors who could edit, that would take care of all people, right? We don't have limited space anymore. JAIS can literally publish every paper it gets if it wants to. It doesn't want to. It wants to be selective, but it has unlimited space. It's an online journal. Me getting in does not keep you from getting in. It does not, someone privileged does not keep someone less privileged from getting in. It's not like, and this idea that we have to do special things for people, that always annoys me because it's like paternalistic, and we have to, and no, you have to do rigorous, high quality, interesting research, whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're privileged or underprivileged.
I completely agree, right, with you. I don't think that we should discourage quality or let someone get away with less quality just because they fall within a particular category. That's definitely not what I'm trying to say. But we also know from experience that across the board exceptions, like in the US, there was a lot of data that showed, right, that when both men and women were given parental leave, women were using it to change diapers to nurse their babies. Men were using it to write papers. And over time, that increased the expectations for tenure across the board, right? So this was an across the board extension that was given to men and women, with the adverse effect that the productivity expectations went up. And so women were actually disadvantaged as a result of this across the board extension. And I think that's just the plea that we're trying to make. I'm not saying we should make exceptions. I'm not saying we should accept lower quality just because someone is a woman or because.
So what do we do about it? I believe what you said is in fact what's happening, right? Men take the leave to do some more work. Women take the leave to actually take care of the children and whatever, right? I buy that. And I think what you're saying is probably accurate, right? That then that raised the bar because now the men were producing more. So now women, it's much harder for them if they're going home changing diapers and not going home and doing additional work. So then the question is, what's the solution to this?
Mhm.
Well, I wanted to flip this a little bit. Wietske, do you know if is there a task force, or I don't know, is there a standing committee? Is there some organ that we have that is actually investigating some of these ideas? Do you know whether that exists?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I think a lot of the awareness during the pandemic and these articles were sort of standalone individual pieces where people raised awareness for an issue, but I don't see it having translated into anything.
Officially,
maybe the
right?
women's,
Yeah.
No, exactly. Maybe the women's network, as you already referred to before, they're very active. Maybe that could be something. And again, I don't want to just say this is only about women, right? There are men who are caregivers, right?
Yeah, but absolutely, and we've actually talked with one of our friends that said. But my question to you is, let's just say that, and this is a much bigger societal issue. But let's say what you're finding is exactly accurate. We do a bunch of research and we find out that that's the case. What can we do about it? Right? What on earth can we do about it? Do we have different standards for women than for men because of this? In which case, the women that aren't caregivers will benefit dramatically from such, right?
No,
because there are a lot of women who, for example, choose not to have babies or for whatever reason, or don't. They have, I don't know. There's a whole gamut of experiences out there. So, but what do you do? I guess that's what my, and I don't see a solution. That's a thorny issue.
It is. And I think we don't really have a ready solution either, other than saying that there needs to be this conversation about it, right? Women need to be able to be open about, actually anyone needs to be able to be open about their unique challenges they're facing, which may temporarily affect their ability to perform. Maybe not because of the reasons that we expect or the reasons that we institutionally already account for, like a maternity leave or a parental leave, but maybe other aspects, as a spouse that passes away and for a year you're unable to teach or you're unable to perform at the level that you're accustomed to, and there needs to be accommodations for that, and that shouldn't be seen as, you shouldn't be held to the same standards during that period.
So tell me this, you're both in North America, so when I went for tenure and promotion in Australia, it was always that you had to write about research performance relative to opportunity. Yeah, it's like as a thing. So what that means is that they looked at, all right, you've graduated, let's say in my case 2008, and then you went up for promotion in 2000 whatever. And so you basically had 4 years, but maybe in these 4 years you were a caretaker for 2 years. Maybe you did this, or maybe you did something else, whatever. Yeah, and then that would be saying, and then relative to opportunity, maybe the opportunity out of the 4 years you only had 2 or something. That would be actually an explicit criterion. You always looked at performance relative to opportunity. So in Germany, it's a lot more implicit. It's not as explicit. So in the sense that you could say something like, look, my performance was this. And then in a footnote, you would write, oh, by the way, I was a caregiver during the pandemic for a year. So please take that into account. But it's tiny somewhere else. In Australia, in the system was always a very explicit paragraph where you said what was actually the opportunity you had to be performing in research. Boom, boom, boom. It might be 100%, might be 50% or whatever. And then your merit's got evaluated this way. Is there something like this in the US? I don't know.
Yeah. We have it for students. We have it for, and it depends at different places. Again, I'm not as up on these as I should be. With students, we have things like hardship withdrawals, right? Where if they're facing some personal hardship, they can withdraw from the class without any penalty and take it again. And we have things, and I don't know exactly at Notre Dame, the policy with tenure, but I can't imagine that, and at Georgia, where I was before either, I can't imagine either one, right? If there's some issue, you can do things like postpone things for a year. I can't imagine that that's not the case. I think at some point you'll have to go up for tenure. Like you can't do that indefinitely. And there are usually timeframes for these schools. Like we have a certain time frame. We added a year to everybody for COVID. I think if you have kids or if you have certain hardship issues, you can add another year or so. I mean, I can't imagine. This is why I say academics complaining is kind of mildly annoying to me, because I've only experienced in academia really, and granted, I came from University of Georgia, where the MIS group there that I was is like literally the most wonderful human beings on the planet, right? And then I come to Notre Dame, where I'm again surrounded by wonderful human beings. So maybe I'm just in this rarefied space again, as usual, where I just am around these wonderful human beings that will, accommodate each other in reasonable ways, right? But at the same time, they still require excellence, right? Neither of these places is going to give someone tenure, out of sympathy or something like that. You have to earn it.
And I think that is exactly what we need, right? We shouldn't give people tenure out of sympathy, but we need to show sympathy. And I think there's still enough academic departments, IS departments, where this is not the case. I also have to say, I'm in a wonderful place here at HEC Montreal, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a wonderful place.
During the pandemic, they were very accommodating with giving me an extra teaching release, allowing me to work from home even after the pandemic finished, because we still don't have a spot in daycare. So they've been really, really wonderful, very understanding. But I think there's still too many places where that understanding, that empathy, sympathy does not exist.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, like, we got to be realistic here. I mean, like HEC, I was lucky enough to visit you once, right? It was a wonderful place, warm people, super friendly. And there are places like this where you come in and you feel encouraged and nurtured and, everything is nice. But we all know there's toxic workplaces, and it'd be stupid to think that they don't exist.
The entire country of Germany basically is a toxic workplace, isn't it?
You're a
so
horrible
that's why Wietske left and came to the right. Are you German? Is your background German?
I'm from the Netherlands.
Oh, okay. You're not German.
Place with the happiest kids in the world for a decade now. So
yeah, okay.
I don't know.
But yeah, I think Germans are mean to each other. They just criticize each other. They're very abrupt, and I think all of these toxic things.
Unlike you, Nick. Unlike you, like you're not as pleasant, and Anyway. Yeah, look, I think this is going to be. I do think I look at it two ways. I do think Wietske is right in the sense that there's stuff to be done. I really do think so, and I do also think that, Nick, I don't think you see the entire world picture on this, other institutions, and so forth. So I do think there's work to be done. I also do think that we are very lucky that we are in a reasonably friendly, reasonably inclusive, reasonably nurturing actual little community. I swear to God, I've seen other people. I don't want to be in economics, man. I mean, seriously, I really don't want to be. I think that looks a lot more toxic from what I hear and what I see and so forth. And nothing against economics here, right? What I'm saying is there are other fields that are harsher on the professional level, on the performance level, on the interpersonal level, etc. So I do think I remember a couple of years ago I went on air somewhere saying, like, I think we have a wonderful group of people, and most of the people are really, really nice, and I still stand by that. I think most of us are genuinely really friendly people, and most of our superstars, we talked about this, they're humble and they're nice and they're encouraging and they take time and so forth. Are there assholes? Of course there's assholes. The more people, the more assholes, right? Someone said. Anyway, but but by and large, I think we're in a good space and can improve and should improve. I think these are my two takeaways. Yeah, there's always stuff to be done and always things we can do better. But by and large, we're in a pretty good space.
So what did we decide? What did we decide about COVID and COVID research? It sucks. Do you agree with me?
Well, I haven't talked about COVID research, but on that, I agree with you. Like, there's very few of that research where I think that, wow, this is really good. Most of that is, I don't know, there's all this shock research now, external shocks or something, and they'd all been like, yeah, we did something, and then the COVID hit, and then we pass it off as an external jolt or shock.
This is what I challenge people to do, right? If you have a COVID paper, just don't try and write it without putting the term COVID in the paper. Because I think there's a lot of really important stuff. Like right now we're on this Zoom call, right? And the whole world was changed with Zoom, and there are some other things that I think COVID has a lasting impact on. But it's just that I don't want to see the word COVID. I want to see you talk about Zoom calls, right? And virtual work versus personal work, right? That is fascinating. Just don't ever mention the word COVID.
I'll give you one example for this, because it so happened to come out like literally yesterday. So in Strategic Entrepreneurship Journal, we worked on a special issue for years, and that just came out yesterday. It's called Environmental Change, Strategic Entrepreneurial Action and Outcomes. Now, the backstory to this is that in 2017, we approached editors of the Entrepreneurship Journal saying, like, we want to do an episode on how environmental change, very broadly conceived, how change in the environment of firms creates opportunities for startups, right? And then, and we landed with SEJ in the end. And in 2019, we launched a special issue. And in 2020, the biggest ever environmental change actually happened, right? So then the pandemic hit. So in hindsight, we had brilliant foresight. It's like, totally we got to talk about environmental change and how that changes the game for entrepreneurship. And it looks like we have a COVID special issue, but no, we did it a couple of years before, and it came out now because it takes a couple of years. And we actually write that in the paper. That we didn't know that soon after we launched the special issue, we actually had environmental change happening. So there are some COVID papers in there, but they're not about COVID. All of them are about environmental change.
But if you're writing one now, but this is, as we wrap up, I want to ask you guys this, because clearly I'm coming from the standpoint of someone who is like, okay, I have all the privileges and I expect performance, and let's perform if you plan to be at a high level, right? That's my point. So my question to both of you is this. If you're not as privileged, if you do have a harder time, or if you maybe didn't have the same background in advisors I did, or maybe you are caregiving, whether it's children or a sick parent or whatever, and you don't maybe have that personal support that I've always enjoyed. And what do you do? And I'm assuming you want to perform at a high level, right? You want to do really well at a, say, research school in the world, and publish and play that game. What advice would you give someone who comes from, say, a less privileged background for achieving? And my advice would just be, you know what? Life's hard. Put your head down and work your ass off. And you might have to make a couple of, you might not be able to party as much. You might not be able to, a couple trade-offs, but that's it. That's the only solution. Kick ass. I guess I'm harsh. I think that's the advice I would give. Is there other advice, or is there a way that you would, I don't know.
I would also say surround yourself with other people facing similar challenges, right? I think part of just dealing with these challenges, if you hear them from others, it makes it easier to accept. It makes it easier to work through it, right? Like in Dutch, and I'm sure in German, you have the same saying. We say, gedeelde smart is halve smart, right? Shared pain. Half pain. Yeah. So I think that is a really valuable advice here, to be honest. Like, and I've seen that. Like, I've seen women getting together, sharing their childcare challenges from the pandemic. I've seen other disadvantaged groups getting together just to be able to share. And sometimes there might not be a solution, but it's just the mere fact of sharing your experiences and learning what other people have done in these challenges can help you work through them, or at least inspire you.
So Wietske, one of the things that I recommended in previous podcasts was that women as editors, right? There's a certain prestige, Wietske, that you have, but you have little children, and someone offers you a role as a senior editor, an associate editor at a good journal, and you're like, ooh, should I take it? I don't have the time, but I want the prestige. I think women should be able to job share, or caregivers should be able to job share. You're still a senior editor, associate editor, but you partner up with someone and then you just handle half the load. And I think we can do. So there are exceptions, I think, to the hold everyone to the same standard. I think editorial work is one of them, right? If you can, but I love the idea. It's like surround yourself with people who are in a similar position, similarly ambitious, similarly go-getters, but maybe are in, one example might be, women who are caregivers or, with little children, get yourself around them, work together, band together, more strength in numbers, right? How do you do that in conferences? Maybe how else?
Well, you just have a WhatsApp group, right? I mean, I know that my old doctoral student, Julian, who's now an assistant professor, he has a WhatsApp group with other people who, just started their tenure track position, something. There are 5 or 6 of them. And what they do, most of it, they vent, they just bitch about stuff that occurs to them. And if you think about it, Nick, we have 2 WhatsApp groups with similar people, and most of the time we just bullshit around, and sometimes we vent, and sometimes we say what we want to say in this safe space because we don't want to say it on air, we don't want to say it publicly, whatever, but we do have these network groups, and they could be as simple as a WhatsApp group or something, right?
But Nick, I love the idea. Maybe sharing editorial loads to make certain roles more accessible and less likely for women to say no, because sometimes we just say no, not because we really want to say no, but as you said, because we're afraid that we will not be able to do our job at the level that we want to do it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But so let's say I invited you, Wietske. I'm JAIS. I'm Dorothy. I invite you to be a editor there, and you're just too busy. What you should be able to do is come back to me and say, look, I'm partnering up with, and then, it's one of your favorite people that is also in a similar situation. We both have little kids. If you bring two of us on, we'll job share. We'll figure it out. We'll take turns. We'll do whatever. Right.
That's a really cool idea. So Wietske's idea was networking. Mine was what I wanted to ask when say to your question, Nick, is well, keep on learning, right? Keep on improving. Work really hard, not just to perform, but work really hard to get better and to bring yourself to that level. I mean, that's at least what I try to do. Is sort of, okay, fail, but not just fail and do it again, but improve, get better, train. And I don't know what other strategy would be. So persist and work to improve.
Yeah. So, and I think specialize, right? If I'm coming from, like, I think I have the luxury of generalizing, right? Because of my training, right? So I can play in maybe, and I would say if you're coming from a background where maybe you didn't have the best training, you didn't have the situation I did where my mentors kind of exposed me to a lot of perspectives and a lot of theories. I would say pick one and go very deep. Right. So you can do that on your own. You can do that instead. So maybe avoid generalizing, go very deep in a phenomenon and a method and a theory or something. Just really, really specialize. I love the idea, Wietske, of finding people similar to you. But then the other thing is publish with them, right? Similar to you, also specializing, and then multiply yourself with bigger collaborations. Right? Instead of everything with you and a co-author, maybe two, maybe have a team of 8 co-authors and learn together. And I'll tell you this right now, when people are counting your A hits, yeah, they'll discount the ones where there are a lot of authors, but at the same time, not so much, right? They don't care. The world is getting very comfortable with big author teams. So I would say co-author. And bring something to the table, right? Have some access to, say, interesting data, have some method that you're a specialist on, have some theory you're a specialist on, and bring something to the table, have a big collaboration. And I think you can do it. I think there are many people who maybe aren't even the most brilliant and just through force of will and work did achieve at a very high level.
But maybe on that topic, and maybe this is too revolutionary, but I also wonder if we should not continue to discourage people to decide to accept that it's okay not to want to be at a top institution, right? Like I think many PhD students are really, really just being talked to that they have to graduate with this many A+ papers and they have to end up at a tier 1 research intensive. But if you love kids and you just want to focus on motherhood for 2 years, I think it should be okay to decide otherwise. I think it should be okay to say, well, I had wonderful training. I had one of the best people in the field be my supervisor. I enjoy doing high-class research, but I also really enjoy doing this. And this is the route that I want to take. And so maybe to some extent, we need to normalize that there are different career paths and that different people have different desires in life. And that is okay. And they're not less of an academic. They're not less of a researcher because they decide to go for a B journal, because they decided to go to a B school and they are happy there because now they have time for work-life balance. So I agree with you. I think, Nick, your point is you shouldn't want to have it all. And it's okay to accept that, this is what I want in life. I had the high-class training, but I'm okay to let it go.
I like that.
Yeah. And in the US, we have, over 1,000 accredited business schools, right? Of which 120, I would say, are, really pushing research, and maybe another 80 really encourage research. And so it's 200. It's like 20% of our accredited business schools are really going to appreciate the research you do. And all the rest are primarily teaching schools for the most part. And, they'll appreciate some research here and there, but and they'll fund it to some extent, but you can find the right mix of, research requirements and teaching requirements and, balance that way. The thing is, you're not going to be hired by, MIT to be to lead a lab unless you're way more brilliant than the rest of us and really incredibly hardworking, right? It's not going to, you can't have both.
Well, that's what I said. I think I said it a year ago or something, right? So this idea by Andrew Pettigrew, who always talked about what's your identity? Who do you want to be? And that's one question to figure out for everyone. And it doesn't have to be stable, right? That's how I always interpret it. You could be something for a while and then you can maybe change your identity. But then again, he said, well, just remember that universities have identity too. Harvard is not MIT. MIT is not Yale. Yale is not Stanford. And, and all the million other ones as well. So they all have different identities. And sometimes it's just a mismatch. If you want to be a great teacher, then maybe you shouldn't go to, I don't know, I don't have a good example now, right? But people should look more for the match. And not every identity is coined by 27A hits, right?
Yeah.
All right, guys, I need to jump, in fact. We've been talking for an hour. Dude, Nick, our episodes are getting longer and longer. We got to stop.
No, we got to cut them shorter. Yeah. We have too much. We talk too much. We have to get back to being disciplined and having soundbite level conversations.
This is also an effect of the pandemic. People talk more now. We didn't have 3 years of conversations and we're catching up.
Yeah, true. Actually, It was really good to catch up with you because, we had exactly. Right. So it took years to get this happening. I'm really glad that we could make it work. Thanks for coming on the show. And good luck with your other papers and your kids and everything else, of course.
Well, wait, how old are your babies now? Now they're old people, right? What are they?
They're old people.
No, the youngest just turned 2 last week, and the boy is 4, so 2 and 4.
So tell me this: sleeping through the night yet? No.
2, yeah.
No.
2.
Not yet.
See, actually,
that's just feed them more. Feed them more, and if they get out of bed, hit them. And then they stay in their bed.
Nick, you said 27 things this episode where people would slap you in the face, and this was just the last one. You just told me to hit my kid that was running.
Well, here he was disrupting our very important podcast.
Exactly.
We welcome disruptions by kids. Those have become normalized because of COVID.
That
I have to do that.
Well, I remember this one episode where I don't know. It wasn't a podcast. I think it was. I was giving a lecture or something via Zoom. And, I was talking to him and my little one came in, or my middle one came in. So the 4-year-old, and he would jump on my lap, and then I'm blabbering on with PowerPoint slides in English and whatever. And everyone seemed fascinated by what I had to say. And then I looked down. After 5 minutes, he was fast asleep. I put my son to sleep with the stuff that I was talking about. All right, guys. It was wonderful to talk with you. Thanks so much for coming on, Wietske. And Nick, I'll see you next time.